Good afternoon. It is 3:17 Tuesday, November 19th. This is the TDN Writers Room podcast, recording a day early this week to accommodate our Green Group guest of the week, Drew Fleming, the new CEO of the Breeders' Cup. I am Joe Bianca, Associate Editor of the Thoroughbred Daily News.
I'm Bill Finley. I write for the Thoroughbred Daily News and have never been bestowed with a title.
I'm Jonathan Green from DJ Stable, the General Manager, and I am wrapped in bubble wrap to make sure that I am safe during this podcast.
Bill, we'll give you a title, don't worry.
Okay.
So this week for our Green Group Guest of the Week, we have the newly minted CEO of the Breeders' Cup, Drew Fleming. Some big news today that Breeders' Cup is related to, and the Green Group Guest of the Week is sponsored by the Green Group, an accounting, tax consulting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry. With more than 500 clients in the horse business, they were bred to save you money. For more information on how they can help you, visit www.greenco.com. So we'll start with the big news of the day, this Thoroughbred Safety Coalition, which I think everybody's in favor of, any united front against this issue that promotes cooperation between tracks and jurisdictions is good and important. But I wanted to ask what specific changes we can expect to see in the next year or two as a result of this forming coalition.
Great question. And our objective is pretty simple, and it's to make horse racing safer. And what you'll see today was the start of it, but there will be some reforms implemented in safety, medication, transparency, operational, and integrity reforms. Some of those that we announced today would be increased withdrawal times for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, prohibited use of, so no stacking in addition to that, a 14-day withdrawal time for corticosteroids, additional no stacking rules, the adoption of avoided claim rule, the collection and reporting of medical records so that our vets have the data they need to make the best decisions, some mandated directly reporting, additional out-of-competition testing, discussions about a uniform riding crop rule, mandated necropsies, creating an electronic veterinary reporting system, creating a task force on racing surface data, standardizing protocols for jockey health and wellness, additional proficiency systems for exercise riders, and creating safety stewards in all jurisdictions. Those were some of the ones that we announced today. But I just want to restate, this is a work in progress. It's obviously a challenge. It's obviously a complex challenge that won't be solved overnight, and more to come. And the nice thing about it is I'm very, very excited for our business because we have a unified front with racetracks representing 85% of stakes races. And we're taking this very seriously, very aggressively, and it'll be well financed. There'll be research and the best and brightest minds working together.
Drew, it's Bill Finley. Thanks for joining us here. Understanding that this is a work in progress, but one thing that was conspicuously absent from the discussion today was LASIX. And where does that stand? Because when the coalition first was heard from in April, the phasing out of LASIX was a big hot topic, and it really was not, so far as I saw, something that came up at all today.
So the Thoroughbred Safety Coalition, it's a new coalition that launched today, but the tracks that were represented up there, they have already committed to phasing out LASIX, which that announcement was made in April. And so the reforms that are announcing today, those build on that prior commitment from those racetracks and the work done earlier this year.
Okay, very good.
Drew, it's Jonathan Green from DJ Stable. First, congratulations again on being named CEO. That's quite a career accomplishment. You should feel really good about that.
Thank you very much, John.
One of the things that I personally enjoyed, having run a couple of horses in the Breeders' Cup the past 2 years, was just I have to compliment the entire group on just the excellence of communication with the horsemen's liaisons and the racing office and the end users, meaning the owners. It just really, for such an exciting day of racing where you guys have literally hundreds and hundreds of owners and trainers that you have to, to represent. I can tell you as an end user that it was seamless. We got everything that we needed to get. We got our credentials, our hats, our parking passes, even all the way down the line, and it just seemed like that it was a seamless operation. So first and foremost, I want to also congratulate everyone within the organization, right down to the horsemen's liaisons at the tracks.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. Obviously, the Breeders' Cup World Championships is a complete team effort. I'm very lucky to have many, many great colleagues that work day in and day out for this business. But more importantly, we have great relationships with many tracks and many other industry teams, and a lot of people send help for the Breeders' Cup, and it is definitely a full team effort.
And one of the questions I have for you is, you guys have continued to evolve just as the racing game has evolved. Originally there was 1 day of racing, now it's expanded to 2 days of racing. Having again participated in the juvenile day both years, it was exciting, to have our day in the sun with the younger horses. What can we tell the general public is on the drawing board for any potential expansions or changes with the Breeders' Cup down the road?
Sure. First, thanks for the compliment on the juvenile day. I think it was great because it really did bring a true sense and theme for Friday. We've gotten significant feedback on that, and we're going to continue to push that day and make sure it's a major race day. We're really excited to be back at Keeneland since we're here for the first time in 2015. And so I think what you're going to see there is really strong world-class hospitality. The build-outs that go into Keeneland start many months in advance with temporary structures that will seat tens of thousands of people. And each year we want to do more and better. We've got a great board that is very supportive, and they're always challenging us that, not to stick with status quo. And the World Championships should celebrate the lifestyle of racing, not only having the best races, but also celebrating the lifestyle, which would include really good food, really good entertainment, really good hospitality. For the past 3 years, we've had a guest chef program that we're continuing to work on and elevate, so that from the day you walk into the racetrack, it is truly a world-class event that hopefully everybody will enjoy.
True, this is Joe Bianca again. I wanted to shift gears. The Breeders' Cup board had a lengthy meeting towards the end of June. This was after the rash of fatalities at Santa Anita about whether or not to keep the Breeders' Cup there or possibly move it to Churchill Downs. Afterward, Craig Fravel released a statement. Not too many other people spoke to the press or anything. The meeting wasn't public. Can you shed some light on what else happened in that meeting, what was discussed, and ultimately how close the Breeders' Cup got to moving the event?
First off, the Breeders' Cup compliments the Stronach Group for the reforms that they have made for Santa Anita. We commend them, and we wanted to honor our commitment to them because they were taking a major step forward in making impactful change in racing. So it was an easy decision, and it was a unanimous board decision to reconfirm our commitment to Santa Anita.
Hi, Drew. Bill Finley again. And sort of similar topic, and especially for those of us here in the East Coast, we're in New Jersey, and there's a lot of New York roots in here. We'd love to see the Breeders' Cup come back our way, and understanding that the New York Racing Association has not applied for the Breeders' Cup in quite some time. But the last time a Breeders' Cup was run outside of either Kentucky or California was 2007. So we're talking about quite a long period of time. And I know you've only committed to the next, I believe, 2020 and 2021 as Breeders' Cup locations. But how about the idea of, moving it back east, be it maybe New Jersey, New York? Laurel has asked for it. Can East Coast people expect to see a Breeders' Cup anytime soon?
Breeders' Cup has a great relationship with NYRA. Really appreciate everything they're doing for the sport. And I'm actually going to be in Japan in about 24 hours with David O'Rourke. And we speak routinely and have the utmost respect for them. In the Breeders' Cup, we always have open dialogue with a number of racetracks, but in keeping with Breeders' Cup policy, we don't comment on host sites until we're ready to do so. Totally appreciate your point, and obviously there's been a lot of open dialogue.
Well, let me pick up on that. I have another question for you. And you segued into your trip to Japan. And I think one of the positives this year's Breeders' Cup was that we had a Korean horse that actually finished third in the Big Ass Fans Dirt Mile, my favorite race. And you also had a Japanese horse. And I know that's always been one of the goals of the Breeders' Cup. You do an excellent job getting European horses, but we don't see a lot of participation from horses from South America, from Australia, from the Asian countries. Has the door been opened a little bit, and do you expect more of the same, more participation from the Far East?
Absolutely. I mean, the Breeders' Cup is a world-class event, and what makes it so unique is our international participation. We have nominators from around the globe. We would like to have as many international runners and participants as possible, and hopefully that resonates with and being in this new job for 8 days now. I'm hopping on a plane tomorrow to fly to Tokyo and meet with the JRA. So it is definitely a goal of the Breeders' Cup to continue to push the international front as much as possible.
Drew, I'm curious a little bit about your background and how you got to the Breeders' Cup, and piggybacking off that, what personal goals you would have for the growth of the Breeders' Cup going forward as CEO.
Sure. I was born and raised in Lexington, but I was not born in the horse business. I would say I was born around the horse business, just playing youth sports with different friends whose family had been in the business. The first time I actually went to Keeneland, I was 10 years old with a good friend of mine named Gatewood Bell, whose family at the time owned John Bell Farm. And Gatewood was one of my closest friends growing up, and quickly, I think, passed on to me the thoroughbred bug. And so I quickly became a fan of racing and was a frequent, probably if you ask my parents, a too frequent patron of Keeneland during my high school years. And to where my first real job was working for Brian O'Rourke, who at the time was managing Wimbledon Farm. And I started just like a lot of people in this business. I was weed eating on Old Richmond Road and DeLong Road and mucking stalls and cutting the grass. And went from there to college and then to law school. And at the time I graduated from law school and had a job, I wasn't married. I didn't have a child. And I was living with a friend. Fortunately, at that time, didn't have a lot of overhead like I do now. I took my first 3 months paycheck and rolled it into a racehorse with Gatewood Bell named Nina Fever. And we had great success with her, rolled it into a number of different racehorses over the year. And it's just been a business that I've been fascinated with. Not only, the beauty of the horse, but the people involved. It's just a great business. That one of the goals of the Breeders' Cup is obviously to get more people in this business and to show them how fun horse racing is.
All right, that's all we got for you, Drew. Thanks for the time.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the call.
Thank you,
No
Drew.
problem. Good luck.
Safe travels.
Take care. Bye.
The Green Group Guest of the Week is sponsored by the Green Group, an accounting, tax, consulting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry. As the Green Group Guest of the Week, Drew Fleming will receive a free 1-hour tax consultation. The Green Group, bred to save you money. For more information on how they can help you, visit www.greenco.com. We'll start with the news of the day, which is the Thoroughbred Safety Coalition that has been formed by a bunch of entities in racing, the Breeders' Cup, Keeneland, NYRA, and it's a little bit sketchy on details at the moment. I think more reforms, more specific reforms will come later, and Drew Fleming gave us some of the specific goals that they're going for. But I just think as a general rule, any kind of united cooperation when it comes to this issue specifically, when it comes to horse safety, we bang on that every week about how there really is no unified message in racing to combat the extremist anti-racing message. So I think this is definitely a good thing and a step in the right direction. The question obviously will be how successful it becomes and how much power it's ultimately going to have, because in a lot of these states, they have to go through the gaming commission and such to get these changes approved. So there's still a lot to shake out when it comes to this, but I just think in general, cooperation in this area in particular is beneficial.
I couldn't agree with you more, Joe. And I do want to have a chance to talk about some of the things that you brought up, mainly the lack of specifics in there and what I think were a lot of unanswered questions, which, matter of fact, that'll be my story in tomorrow's TDN. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that in the many years I've been covering racing, this is unprecedented. People in racing coming together to work for the common good, and rather than just looking out for their own self-interest. And that's one of the reasons why racing is in the pickle that it is. It's more than just, the equine fatalities, all the problems that horse racing has. A lot of it revolve around the fact there's been no cooperation among the various entities, and it's been a very dysfunctional sport. So to see people in the major racetracks, and they got all the major racetracks on board. There's not anyone notable that's missing from that group. To get them to say, we're going to work together for the good of this sport and to make the sport safer, that's the headline of the day. And that's the thing that people should most concentrate on.
No question about it. I mean, you're sitting here in an industry where I remember getting in and we had an old-time trainer, Walter Reese, and we said, Walter, we're running in 4 different racetracks. How come we have to have 4 different licenses? And he said, that's just the way it is. And okay, fine. And there's all these different medication rules. That's just the way it is. And there's all this rule. That's just the way it is. And it was always, that's just the way it is, to the point where finally he said, what you guys don't understand about racing is there's more splinter groups than a lumberyard here. There's nobody that wants to take charge and nobody that wants to be a figurehead or a figurehead group and kind of run the ball and do what's best for the athletes, for the participants, owners, trainers, jockeys, et cetera, and for the betting public. So the fact that we're working on some key mentions, transparency, accountability, centralized set of standards, those are all wonderful pillars to build the coalition on. I really hope that they have the power to be able to do these things because there are a lot of obstacles, but hopefully this will be a lightning rod to bring people together to help strengthen the industry, not only from outside forces, but internally as well.
I think to you guys' point, I think the number was 84% of 85%, sorry, of the racetracks in America will be represented.
I don't mean to be a know-it-all, no, but 85% of the stakes races.
Stakes races, okay. That's why we have
it was officially 84.6, so both of you were right, but we rounded up for simplicity's sake.
We'll make Bill's title the well-actually fact checker at the TDN writers room.
The big-ass fan, stat checker.
Oh, man, that's how you know we'll have made it if we get a big-ass fan sponsorship over here. So it definitely represents a large bulk of the top-class racing in America, and I think this in conjunction with the phase out of the LASIX thing, whether or not you feel positively about that, you can at least say that the stakeholders, the major stakeholders in this industry are at least starting to come together and address the systemic issues with major reforms. And, it remains to be seen how successful or what path it takes. But I think the effort is appreciated, and I think that shouldn't go unnoticed.
Well, I want to circle back to some of the things that I thought were missing from it. And Joe, you just touched upon one is LASIX. And now Drew Fleming told us that the tracks that originally came out with the announcement in April, they're going to phase out LASIX, are still on board with that. But there was not one mention of LASIX in this thing. This very wordy press release came out with quotes from everybody. And this whole thing began back in April, where the phasing out of LASIX was the central topic of what they had to say. And it makes me, as a anti-LASIX guy, as a guy who wants to get rid of this damn thing in the sport and has felt that way for years, it makes me nervous that all of a sudden this was just, like wiped out, that it didn't even exist. And, will they still go ahead, the 4 or 5 tracks that we're talking about that are the leaders of this and get rid of LASIX like they plan to? I don't know. And I just think that they shouldn't have left that open to discussion or leave it so open-ended like that.
It's got to be because they just don't have the scientific proof yet to show which way that argument's going to go. I don't think that they're going to want to come out and say, we are eliminating X drug, whether it's LASIX or Salix, or there's a million of them that they can go after. And are they really going after it because they feel like it's a masking drug for other things, and that's why they're trying to get rid of it, or if it's just because it's not needed, and if the horses are bleeding, then they shouldn't be racing. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to once they make a statement. My feeling is once they make a statement, it's got to be based on XYZ. Double-blind studies that show that this is the real reason why this is the the cause, the linchpin of why horses are breaking down. And until they have that scientific data, I don't think they can make another statement yet.
Well, they already did make a statement, though. That's the thing. Now, I don't believe that it causes horses to break down either. It's not the be-all and end-all of horse safety, horse welfare, and also racing's perception among the general public. And again, we've talked about this many times, and I'll repeat myself. It doesn't matter what the three of us in this room think. It's what the man on the street thinks. And man on the street thinks that horses in America are running on drugs and are hopped up and everything. And are they right or are they wrong? I'm not sure that really matters. It's what they believe. So they already came out with a statement that they were going to get rid of it. So why are they backtracking now? And they've had 40 years to figure out if this is good or bad for the sport. You don't need another 5. Just make up your minds. If you want to say tomorrow, keeps happening. Remember, the Breeders' Cup was going to get rid of LASIX, and they backed off. Just either do it or don't. I'm sick of this dancing around with the damn thing. If you want to have LASIX and just say we're going to be the outlier of the rest of the world, then whatever. It's not the single most pressing issue in racing. I understand that, but just go ahead and do it. I mean, I'm sick of this kind of nibbling around the corners of this and say we're going to make some reforms, and they never do. So I just thought that the fact that LASIX was not part of the discussion at all today was very telling.
I think I agree with John's point that I don't think there is really scientific consensus. I don't think it's something that really has been the focus of racing reformists for that long, even though, like you said, LASIX has been around a long time. I think it still needs to be fleshed out more. And there are strong feelings on both sides, both in the scientific community and in the racing community. The other thing that I didn't see mentioned was synthetic tracks. And to me, that's a big thing to leave out, because it's pretty much undeniable at this point that synthetic tracks are more safe than dirt. Some synthetic tracks are more safe than others, but I think the overall point is that synthetic tracks are safer. And, that's kind of a foolproof thing if you want to cut down on fatalities. And I understand the arguments against it. Honestly, I hated when Keeneland went to synthetic and Santa Anita went to synthetic as a handicapper, because to me, it made the results completely random. Bob Baffert had a good quote about it back then, and he said it makes good horses look mediocre and mediocre horses look good. And it was impossible for me to handicap. So selfishly, I was happy when the synthetic tracks went away. But of course, it's something you have to re-examine in the wake of these fatalities and this terrible news in the media about racing, that this is a relatively easy fix, and it doesn't seem to be something that people are even focused on anymore at all.
No, I agree. I mean, there's been, I thought after the Santa Anita problems and after Mongolian Groom, there would be, a real torrent of support to go to synthetics. It's just not happening. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it is going to happen. And again, if racing wants to make the argument to the public that we're doing everything we can, that's what they keep saying. We're doing everything we can to make the sport safer. Well, if you don't go to synthetic tracks, no, you're not. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very simple. Now, I realize there are arguments for keeping dirt tracks. I think the breeders, would be apoplectic if every major racetrack in the country went to synthetic surfaces. But, again, do we really want to do everything we can by the horse or not? If we do, then you go to synthetic tracks. And it looks like it's just not going to happen.
And the bottom line is there are other considerations. Everybody can say that the most important thing is equine safety, and I think it is good to put that at the top of the list, but there are other considerations. And synthetic tracks, for that brief era, I think, started to upend the history of the sport. You go back and look at these winners of the bluegrass when they had the synthetic track there, and it's like Mamba and Stately Victor and these horses. It's just, it didn't line up with the rest of racing's history. So I think there are other considerations, as much as people like to pretend otherwise. But I think in any discussion, if we're going to be honest and forthright about putting the equine safety first, it has to include synthetic tracks, at least a debate about it, and I just haven't even seen that.
Joe, and to elaborate on that, or to sort of support your point, we talk about LASIX, whips, corticosteroids, whatever. There is nothing that happens in racing or exists in racing where you could say, if we change this one thing, we are certain that we are going to improve safety. Now, I'm an anti-LASIX guy, and I don't really necessarily believe that getting rid of LASIX is going to keep horses alive. I have other reasons why I want to get rid of LASIX. But you can't point to one single thing where you can say, if we do this, we are definitively, concretely going to save horses' lives. It's one thing and one thing only. And, it can be done, within a matter of months to convert a track, and you'll have safer racing. Geez, damn it. Isn't that a no-brainer?
Yeah. It isn't. As when you lay it out like that, it seems like it should be a no-brainer, but this is a sport with a deep, rich history of dirt racing, and to completely get rid of it, it's just not going to be well received.
Well, do you want racing to be here 20 years from now?
Yeah, that's the question for sure. But it's not open and shut.
20 years from now, we have racing in Kentucky only and maybe one or two other states. People are going to say, well, damn it, we should have gone to synthetic surfaces. And, we got dirt racing, but look what the costs were to keep it that way.
Well, and you guys, you also have to bring up for the horse's safety. you have to bring up all of the corrective surgeries that are going on with these foals. What a lot of people don't realize is when foals are born, they may toe out, they may toe in, they may buck knee. There's all kinds of conformation issues that occur either in utero or once they're born and they're learning how to stand and strengthen their legs. And those conformation issues do not line up with what you look for when you're buying a horse at a sale. When you're buying a horse at a sale, it's really like the Miss America pageant, where you're walking a horse up and down, you're looking at their conformation, because you can't guess on anything else. You can't watch them run. You can't really know how strong of a heart they have as far as racing, not the size of the heart, because they can score that. But, so many of the farms are now electing to go with corrective surgeries where they're putting screws in, or they're shaving part of a bone off, or trying to stimulate certain growth patterns to try to make the horse look more correct. So from a phenotype, from a physical standpoint, they look correct, but genetically they're not. Genetically, they're still offset. There's still all these issues. And when a horse is born and it's born with an issue, it usually overcompensates to correct itself. So if we surgically correct it and it goes on the racetrack and it doesn't have the gait to match this new surgical, leg that it has, there's an issue. There's a weakness there. There's a genetic weakness as well as possibly a physical weakness. So again, another thing, Bill, to your point of trying to make sure that they're out of the voluminous issues that are out there that could potentially be adding up to a horse's lack of safety, that has to be one that's addressed also. And I have not heard anybody talk about that. And, call me a conspiracy theorist, but maybe it's because the breeders that are involved in the action of some of these coalitions don't want to talk about it because it affects them in their pocketbooks.
I think that's an interesting point, and I think that can tie into Lasix and some of these other issues where, you might be weakening the breed by correcting this issue every single time it pops up. And it's a similar thing when horses retire to stud who only have like 5 or 6 starts. They start every couple of months, horses that obviously had soundness issues or bad feet or whatever, and you're perpetuating that in the breed. Same thing with the Lasix thing. You might be perpetuating deficiency in horses that are likely to bleed.
No question about it. And that's exactly what's happening now is you have these sires that are, or mares, but mostly the sires because they have so many more foals that are just reintroducing this genetic weakness, that's a physical weakness as well, back into the gene pool. Yeah. There's outliers. I don't think Danzig ran very many times. There are outliers in history where horses were sound, but just, for one reason or another didn't run enough, and they were able to produce sounder horses. But the majority of horses that are standing at stud, have conformation flaws. None of them are really perfect per se. And it's just when you start getting to these foal crops of 150, 200 foals that are out there, and then maybe some of them retire and they're being added, and so on and so on and so on. That's what's weakening the gene pool. It's a whole nother therapy session for us, quite frankly. But it's just one other issue that I think nobody is really talking about right now. But it's one of those dirty little secrets in the industry of, well, I can bring my cross-leg yearling up to Saratoga and get 10,000 for it, or I can do the surgery and maybe get 100,000 for it. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can do it right now. It's within the rules of the game, but nobody's recognizing that that's being done. And that is, in my estimation, weakening the herd.
We're going to move on to something similar to a discussion we had last week about the 3-year-old championship and maximum security. Yesterday in the news, we had the latest in the Gary West lawsuit saga, where he was raging about the lawsuit being dismissed by a federal judge trying to overturn the Kentucky Derby result. Before I say anything, I want to say that on principle, I do agree with Gary West that the Kentucky stewards did not conduct themselves in a transparent way or a helpful way to the sport. When you have a 22-minute inquiry and then have a 30-second statement to explain your decision that affects millions, if not billions of dollars, and it doesn't sit well with the racing fan or the racing participant. So I'll say that I agree with him in principle on that point. But we're in mid-November now, and we're 6.5 months after the Derby, and he's still going on with this. And to me, it reeks of a guy who surrounds himself with people that don't tell him no, because this is a bad look. I don't know anybody that thinks this is a good look for the owner of the horse who might be 3-year-old champion to still be in public and complaining about, like, he called it un-American yesterday. You went to court. You got your day in court and it got dismissed. So that's as American as it gets. And I think it's trivializing and it's insulting to say things like this reeks of an un-American totalitarian regime that they have in third world countries when you're talking about the biggest first world problem you could ever have. And I think it's particularly insulting in terms of everything that's going on right now in the world to compare that to this guy not getting a trophy that he thinks he should have. You got to drop it, man. You got to drop it. And we spoke about this last week. Bill brought it up that I don't think this rubs people the right way in terms of voters for the 3-year-old championship. And it's time to give it up, man. Like, I get that you think you were originally wronged. And I'm not, like I said before, I'm not completely disagreeing with you on that, but the decision has been made. It's time to move on.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. We wish the guy would just please let it go. I mean, this is just, and then Joe, not only to say that he's going to appeal after losing his round in court, but, the exact quote is, "This is reminiscent of totalitarian regimes in third world countries." Man, is that over the top. And I think you're right. I think he's probably surrounded himself with yes men. Maybe lawyers are, like getting fat off this guy's, probably nearly bottomless wallet and everything. But, if you want to know why he has zero chance of winning this, somebody posted on Twitter, when you sign your license application, you hereby, the wording includes the following statement: "I agree to comply with all rules, regulations, statutes, and steward judges' directives related to Kentucky racing." Could it be any more clear than that? You signed the damn papers that said that you have to agree to what the stewards say, pal. Like, look, if you want to waste, another $800,000 in legal fees, I'll represent you for half the cost. I'll take $400,000 and the outcome will still be the same. You'll
just
lose.
read him that tweet.
You will lose, but you'll spend less money with me.
Well, there's your title.
Yeah.
Is now Esquire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, it's eventually going to go away. I'm sure the appeals court won't hear his case either. Then, what's he going to do? Try to take it to the Supreme Court of the United States? Well, yeah, they'll just laugh at that, something like that, and then it'll eventually go away. But, he's sullying his own image, which is, this is a guy that's been a really great owner and good for the game in a lot of ways. And he's just, beating himself, letting himself get beat up over this, and it's needless.
Yeah, and he doesn't stop. Like, there's a new story every month where he's making some outlandish, hyperbolic statement about how wronged he was and how this translates to the end of American society. Like, this is, like I said, this is someone who is being told, and there's a bug in his ear about, yeah, you really gotta keep on this. You gotta really keep grinding this axe. And literally every single other person is thinking to themselves, please stop. Please let it go. The Derby was 6 months ago. It's time to move forward.
And also, too, I mean, there might be some people that disagree. The horse deserved to come down on top of that. Even if he didn't deserve, even if you're sitting here thinking, but that's a bad call from the stewards, it still doesn't matter because, again, reading that language and the rules of racing that go back to, when, George Washington was running horses, are that the decisions of the stewards are final. So, it's not even that relevant or germane to the conversation, but I'll just add to the fact that, damn it, the horse deserved to come down.
Yep. Another piece of news from this week, another continuing story also, is the New York Department of Labor cracking down and fining major barns in New York a lot of money for back pay and poor record keeping and that sort of thing. This is above my pay grade, so I defer to my co-hosts here. But what do you guys think? Do you think there's more of this coming? Maybe not in New York, but in different states. And what do you think this means for the way trainers conduct business?
Yeah, there's no question that the rights of the employees should be recognized, especially for laborers who may or may not be independent contractors. There's all kinds of case studies that go on, or I should say case law that goes on, whether or not somebody is in fact a full-time employee, a part-time employee, a per diem. That's something that Attorney Bill Finley should look into, quite frankly, because that is a tough thing to figure out. Racing for decades and decades and decades has always been People showing up at 5 o'clock in the morning, taking care of their horses until 9 o'clock. Sometimes they do laundry. Sometimes they do other jobs, for the barn. But for all intents and purposes, their day is done until racing starts, and then it starts up again. Time clocks and facial recognition time clocks and paperwork and everything, those are all really important for a majority of the industries that are out there. And I understand why New York is coming in and going after some of the higher named trainers, better known trainers. But quite frankly, the statement that Cuomo came out with was grandstanding, and it was grandstanding at its finest example. And finest is probably the wrong word because I'm damning it and not trying to make it sound good. But when you go after trainers like a Linda Rice and like a Kieran McLaughlin and a Chad Brown, these are individuals who have worked their way up the proper way through the industry, cut their teeth on the racetrack, have worked really hard to get the top owners and to have a clean program for the most part individually. And they're winning big races, and that's why they're targets. I understand why the state of New York is coming in, and I think that if they're really trying to come in and they're trying to protect the employees and give them a voice, kudos to them. But it sounds like it was, I hate to use the word witch hunt because it sounds like everything going on in DC, but it really was. They really went after, in my opinion, they went after the top recognizable trainers in New York and said, everything you guys have been doing for the past 20, 30, 40 years, we're throwing out the window. We're giving you a whole new set of rules and regulations. So on top of everything else that you have to do, dealing with owners that are temperamental, horses that may be more temperamental, and weather conditions, racing offices, all the things that trainers have to go through. And then on top of that, have to deal with the Department of Labor. It just sounds like, why are these trainers coming back to New York?
You make a good point, John. And I would like to say, and you kind of touched on this too, racing has a pretty poor history of how backstretch workers are treated. So you have to keep that in mind. But I do agree with you. It seems rather excessive what they did to these guys. First of all, the federal government went after them, and then they got their pound of flesh. And then now this is the state going after them as well. And, some of the fines are just, excessive amounts. Wasn't Chad Brown fined $1.6 million by the federal government? I don't know if that's...
Yeah. And that's what it's negotiated down to.
Exactly right. But one thing that you didn't touch upon is that when the federal government went after them, it was the big names. And look, nobody wants to get fined $1.6 million, but if there's anybody in racing that can afford to pay it, it's probably Chad Brown. This time around, they got Leo O'Brien and Dutnath Shivmangal. And I believe Leo O'Brien, now these are guys that have 2 or 3 horses. And I believe Leo O'Brien was fined $85,000. Now, I don't know what the man's finances are, but I can't believe that he's a wealthy man. He really hasn't had a lot of success over recent years. So, I would imagine that could be a crushing penalty for somebody like that, even maybe more so than the amount that Chad Brown was fined. And, so now they reached out and went after the little guy. And I'm wondering too that, probably they could go after virtually any trainer in New York, because it's like you said, everybody was kind of doing it the old fashioned way, which the government says, you can't do that. Well, I don't know how they picked and chose who they went after, but, if we're going to hear, there's going to be another story to this, another chapter, and I hope there's not, that, maybe there'll still be more names to come.
It sounds like it. It sounds like that they're attacking the industry. And I know, from an IRS standpoint, when I worked in the accounting firm, you would see that the IRS would target certain industries, and they would go after certain pockets of those industries. And they would try to go with the big names because that would scare people. And also those people could usually afford the fines. And then they would slowly work their way through. And then they would go on to the next shiny object, which is another industry that they were interested in, and kind of attack it. So, but I'm hoping upon hope that this is it for as far as the state of New York goes. But it's just another hurdle they're throwing in front of people as far as, why you shouldn't come to New York to race. And I know, when you're sitting there on the Aqueduct winter meet and there's 6-horse fields every time, and you say, well, where is everybody? They're in Florida and they're gone, because they can't afford or they don't want to bring in facial recognition time cards.
So last week and this past weekend, we had the end of the major sales activity for the year in 2019, facing Tipton about a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, and then Keeneland November, which closed on Sunday. We have an owner here. We have an owner and a buyer here, John Green, who probably has better insights than me or Bill on what trends, if any, you could pick up from the breeding stock sales and what your overall impressions were.
Well, first, thank you. First and foremost, I can tell you as a guarantee that not one horse who went through the Keeneland nor the Fasig-Tipton sales were performing on Lasix. That's first and foremost. Okay, that's a scoop.
How about corrective surgeries?
Corrective surgery, I can't comment on that.
Okay. All right.
But the good news is that it looks like overall that sector of the market is really stabilizing. The top of the market again has increased in value. You had 18 horses that were sold for $1 million or more at Fasig-Tipton, including Blue Prize, who sold for $5 million. And then you had another 3 or 4 that were RNA'd at $1 million or more. So again, 22, 23 horses, depending on who you're talking to, that sold for $1 million or more just at Fasig. And then at Keeneland, another 14 horses sold for over $1 million or more. Interestingly enough, Keeneland actually rang the bell with gross receipts of just over $200 million, which is really outstanding and astonishing if you think about it. Over a 12-day sale to have $200 million in sales, which I think, ironically enough, is also going to be Gary West's legal fees to fight this maximum security issue.
You're great at tying those jokes together,
It's
John.
all part of the
done.
jokes.
Well
I'll
done.
be at the Laugh Factory on Friday from 8 to 9. Don't forget to tip your waitresses. But overall, again, with everything, all the chaos and everything going on with the racing industry, it was really nice to sit back and say the breeding part of the industry is very strong, mostly at the top, but also there were even buyers from Korea and Turkey and South America buying on books 5 and 6. So there was a consistent buy end user, throughout the week.
That's not my field of expertise, but John, I think you touched on one point I would like to make. We've spent a lot of time in these podcasts, talking about all the gloom and doom in racing and all the problems. Obviously, be it any segment of the market, yearlings, racehorses, broodmares, et cetera, 2-year-olds, the buyers are acting like there's nothing wrong. There's been no sense whatsoever that people are hesitant to dive into the deep end and spend a lot of money for these horses, worrying that, perhaps they won't have California to run in 3 or 4 years or something like that. So I think that's positive for the industry that at least, some very smart people don't seem to be that worried about it.
No question about it. And one of the interesting things from a financial standpoint that always intrigued me about the horse industry is that there's about a 9 to 12 month lag period with regard to global economics compared to the horse industry. So when, United States went into a recession in 07, 08, it wasn't until 2009 where you started to see a downturn in prices. And there's lots of theories as to why that is. But I think first and foremost, people are very excited about breeding operations. All the horses that go through the ring are basically undefeated, and they have the world ahead of them, and they're all dreaming about the Derby and the Breeders' Cup in years to come. So there's a certain amount of Pollyanna, with regard to those types of sales. The racing horses that sold, again, the ones that proved that they could, win allowance or stake races sold really, really well. And there was a significant drop off after that. So I think when the bloom is off the rose and the horses have already proven what they can do on the racetrack, the prices tend to go down. Somebody told me years ago, there was a study that University of Kentucky delivered that said that over 90% of horses that are sold, that is the highest value that those horses will ever be. That's an interesting statistic. So basically, 9 out of 10 horses that go through the sales ring, that's when they're going to be worth the most. Why is that? Well, it's because they've never run. Everyone thinks that they have the next champion ahead of them. And the ones then that do become champions, those are that represent the 10% that rise up and usually are sold for a lot more thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that before, about how buying at the very top of the market is a losing proposition 99% of the time. These horses are never going to make back what you paid for them. One observation I had, and I was wondering if you had any comment on this, John, I saw Justify as a covering sire was immensely popular. And of course, he's a Triple Crown winner, so that comes along with it. But I went back and compared him to American Pharoah with his first crop. So American Pharoah, 2016 was his first year at stud. As a covering sire that year, he had 12 horses sell in the ring for an average of $446,000, a median of $427,000. Justify had 21 mares sell and foal to him, an average of $789,000 and a median of $700,000. And I wonder if that is because of a slightly stronger economy, but in my opinion, it seems to be the fact that Scat Daddy is no longer with us, and there are only certain opportunities to breed to his great sons. There aren't going to be that many going forward. Whereas when American Pharoah went to stud, Pioneer of the Nile was still alive, and he wasn't quite as big of a deal as Scat Daddy was, who was an international super sire. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, because that surprised me to have that discrepancy between 2 Triple Crown winners and their early returns.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think one of the reasons why Mares in Fall to Justify, I think, sold so much better than Mares in Fall to American Pharoah during the same first year of their careers has to do solely because there's a copycat effect in the industry. So it was almost 40 years between Triple Crown winners. And then American Pharoah came out, and the foals, got mares pregnant, and they sold, and people were very excited to have those. Well, ironically enough, those foals ran this year. 3 of them just finished first, second, or first and 2/3 in the Breeders' Cup. So he looks like he's going to be a success. So everyone went, aha, okay, that's Triple Crown winner. His first crop foals did really, really well as juveniles. Here's another Triple Crown winner. Now, different sire powers, different family lines, different mares that were bred to him, but it's still a copycat, and people feel comfortable in that knowledge, knowing it worked once, it's going to work again, in my opinion.
All right, that's going to do it for this week on the TDN Writers Room. I want to thank our Green Group guest of the week, Drew Fleming, Bill Finley, and John Green. I'm Joe Bianca signing off. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening.